Okay, Chris Balazs, we're live, man. Welcome.
Thank you.
Provenir.
Indeed.
Exciting. Let's just, for everyone listening, because it's so new, other than those super close to this industry, what is it, why are you doing it, and what are you trying to achieve?
Okay, so this is probably a big answer to that question is on the 20th of June this year, Provenir became the first Australian company to be licensed to produce meat that is processed on the farm. So very simply, the concept is instead of the animals going to the abattoir goes to the animals. When you phrase it that way, it sounds like a really simple, activity to do.
Yeah.
In actual fact, it's really complex. So to meet all the regulatory requirements of producing food for human consumption and then fitting that in the back of a semi-trailer that actually is licensed to travel on all the roads that we have takes an awful lot of engineering, design, modifying processes such that it can actually be done. And the question is, why would you go to such an extent to do it? Because it is an expensive exercise. For myself and for the co-founders of the company, it's all around two principal aspects. One is animal welfare.
Yeah.
I'm a farmer myself. I've been producing beef for 17 years. I know the both sides of the industry, selling the meat and also raising the animals. And for the other co-founders as well, they're all very focused on the animal welfare and the meat quality that comes out of it. So we've got a chef who's in charge of operations. So he's an award-winning chef, and his driver was, where do I get local meat with full provenance that I know is delicious that I can serve to my customers?
Yeah.
We also have a veterinarian on board as well, so Dr. Phil Larwell, who has spent a lot of time in the outback of Australia and has seen those huge road trains with the cattle that are on there for days at a time, and that was what really motivated him. We have Christopher's partner, Jane, who's been working in the farmers market area and has been working with small-scale farmers for most of her professional life. And we also have the chair of the board, who is Marissa, who's a lawyer from up in Townsville and is just passionate about the food and is looking at the regulations and helping guide us through the quagmire of regulations that do exist in Australia.
Yeah, absolutely. Pretty impressive group of human beings. Let's just unpack both of those things, the animal welfare, animal husbandry, and the eating quality. Starting with the animals, talk us a little bit further through. Intuitively, it makes sense. Putting an animal on a truck when it's never been on a truck before sounds stressful, but let's get a little bit scientific about it.
Yeah, so for myself, my background is I'm a scientist, studied zoology and chemistry as well.
Whereabouts?
Melbourne University.
Nice.
And then did honours in various places. So for me, I understand the zoology of the animals that we're dealing with. And when I became a farmer 17 years ago, that actually started a deeper relationship with the animals that they're very cattle in particular are very complex animals as well. They have social hierarchies from there. You can see that when you're handling them on a day-to-day basis. They have social structures, they have friendship groups, they sentinel beings that I think for myself they have to be dealt with absolute respect.
Yeah.
They're a prey animal, so by that they have quite well developed fight or flight responses, and so putting an animal through extended periods of stress actually downgrades the state that animal is in. So
because of the cortisol and different things that are released.
Yeah, so if we talk about the metabolic side of things as well, so in a stressful period, adrenaline is released from the the glands, and then that is converted into cortisol, which gives the animal additional strength and energy from there because it's in a stressful situation. Which in itself is not so much of an issue because, we all go through, a door slams and, you get a burst of adrenaline and so forth. So that's not that uncommon. The issue really comes into is the extended periods of stress in which the live transport to the processors can be, a good scenario would be 2 days, can quite often be up to 4 days from the time they actually leave the farm to the time that they're actually knocked at the processors.
Wow.
So that build-up of adrenaline over that period creates a much higher level of cortisol in the animal's body from there, which starts to consume the glycogen or the sugars that sit within the muscle from there. And so when there is that depletion of glycogen, when we go into the post-knocking stage of having the carcass go from the body temperature of 37 degrees down to the required temperature of 7 or less after 24 hours, the glycogen is required to convert into lactic acid to provide the pH drop, which is associated with tenderness in the meat itself. The problem that the extended stress periods is that it depletes what they refer to as the glycogen bucket. So at the point of knocking, there isn't sufficient glycogen to get the appropriate pH drop through the conversion into lactic acid. So what happens is we have a more variable meat product that comes at the end of it. It's not as tender. It has associated with what's referred to as dark cutting from there. So the muscle structure doesn't go through the proper process to be desirable eating on the other side of that. So when we look at, I've sort of almost converted the animal welfare into the human, into the meat quality, because honestly, from us, the two are directly related to that.
And it makes absolute sense. And anecdotally, I think everyone within the industry accepts that. You mentioned to me yesterday that you were looking at partnering with, was it the University of WA or?
Yeah, so we've been accepted as a foundation partner of a CRC, or a cooperative research centre, which is a collaboration between government funding, universities and industry that will look at specific topics. The ones that we've been a foundation member of is the Future Food Systems. So this is really a proposal that went to the government and was accepted, that Australia has a role in being a food bowl for the region from there, and they're looking at how can we develop more robust food systems, and this ties back into environmental impacts as well, particularly with regards to livestock. But and there's also food innovation in there as well, and food hubs and different distribution systems. So it's really quite a big program.
Driven by the federal government or the state government over there?
Federal government. And so Murdoch University over in WA was a partnering university, and through their meat research as well, we're going to conduct some more in-depth metabolic studies on why does the meat that is processed on the farm taste so good? What is the rationale behind that from a scientific point of view?
It'll be fascinating to find out. And tell me, and you don't have to if you don't know, is there any research around from a nutritional perspective with the end consumer, whether that's the bioavailability of the minerals and vitamins, etc., in the meat, or just the actual eating enjoyment of it? Is there any science around what you're doing to the end consumer other than the obvious?
Are you referring to the grass diet from there versus
it's probably a part of it. The grass diet, which I do want to speak a whole bunch more about with you in a minute. The grass diet coupled with the on-farm harvesting as opposed to travelling.
I'm not aware of any of that research specifically, and because on-farm processing has been around for a long time, and that's been the luxury of the farmers. The challenge has always been that meat isn't allowed to be commercially sold because it hasn't gone through the appropriate licensing procedures to ensure that the meat is safe for consumption. Now, this is for the first time that is actually able to be done. So there's a lot of scientists who are very keen to get involved with this, because now they can actually properly conduct double-blinded studies to see the correlation between the metabolic results that come back and blinded taste tests as well.
Got it. Talk to me then a little bit about the whole, from your perspective, the three. Like I look at animals as three. They're either, they're grain-fed, where they're predominantly, for certainly a big portion of their life, finished on grain, and then you've got pasture-raised and grain-finished, even though quite often people call it a pasture-fed product, and then what you're doing, which is a pure pasture-raised and pasture-finished product. What's the science behind what's happening there? If we talk about things like the levels of omega-3s and omega-6s, that seems to get a lot of airplay these days, particularly when it comes to grain-fed product. So I haven't done any specific research in this area. So what I'm describing here is what I've read through the papers from there. So as I think it was Michael Pollan said, we are what we eat eats. So, we have to be conscious about, particularly if we're eating meat, is like, what did that animal eat in there? Because that's what has made that animal, and we are what we eat. So from there, on a metabolic side of things, there are higher levels of omega-3s in grass-fed animals. Now, some of the discussion goes into the way of actually cooking the meat. So if the meat is cooked as a rare or medium rare steak, then a lot of the omega-3s are maintained within the meat and then become bioavailable to us through the ingestion of that meat. If the meat is cooked beyond medium rare, or medium, the research is showing that the cooking process breaks down the omega-3 and makes that it's not bioavailable for us for ingestion as well. So that's been one of the arguments, is saying, it doesn't really matter what it eats, but it's the way that you cook that actually ends up making more of a difference to the availability of the nutrients. Wow, I've not heard that before, but it does make absolute sense.
And those that are on grass, the studies have shown that they've got higher levels of antioxidants in the meat. And again, that the cooking and the temperature plays an important role in the availability of the antioxidants in the meat itself.
Yeah, fascinating. How do you go about governing your farmers? Like, how do you ensure that it is fully pasture-raised and not finished on grain in any shape or form? Do you look even deeper into what they're using insofar as herbicides and pesticides, both on their fields and potentially around, what they're using to keep weeds, etc., at bay? Just a bit of commentary on that, Chris, would be great.
Yeah, so we call it the onboarding process for our farmers. So we have to accredit the farmers with our own accreditation system that we have. So which is
an internal thing.
It's an internal.
Provenir,
Yep. So they might be members of certain systems such as PCAS, which is the pasture certified assessment scheme. So basically grass-fed.
Great.
So they could be that. It's not a requirement for them to be in that system, but we go out to each of the farms. We know the farmers themselves personally from there. It takes around about a 2-month period for us to onboard the farmers, so they need to understand how we operate. We need to understand how they operate as well. Some of the farmers that we've partnered with is a group called 8 Families. They're around the Riverina Holbrook area, which is where we're operating in New South Wales. And they are regenerative farmers, so they've adopted the holistic management, land management process from Alan Savory.
Yeah, amazing. Can you just, it's a great conversation, but sustainable farming, what you actually mean by that? Because I think people use that word very liberally without really, me included, really understanding what that means to a cattle farmer.
That's a great question, Paul, because people always say to me, "Oh, it's sustainable." I was like, "Well, what do you mean sustainable? Is it sustainable to the environment? Is it sustainable to the farmer? Is it sustainable to the supply chain? Where do you use that term, sustainable?"
Yeah.
So if we look at environmental sustainability, there's been a lot of commentary lately about cattle being one of the greatest environmental, I guess, vandals.
Vandals. I haven't heard that one.
To the environment, which, depending on how they're managed, can be absolutely true or can be the total opposite from there. So there's been there's an emerging study coming out now about regenerative farming. So the principles of regenerative farming is to truly understand your land. So there is no set formula for regenerative farming because there's no set formula for a farm. Every farm has different creeks and topography and rainfall and soil type. So it's actually embraces the complexity of the biology on which we live. So they have guiding principles to not only become sustainable, but regenerative. So they don't just sustain the land, they actually regenerate the land to put it back to the state that it was previously. So again, there's this natural transition back into natural grasses from there to get the right amount of wooded area as well. So one of the things that just on that point is I live on the edge of the Western Plains, and there was a big push a while back to plant lots and lots of trees and replace all the trees that had been taken. Now we've moved to, we actually shouldn't be planting trees because they're on grasslands. So trees don't exist on grasslands where we have this mental image that, we've taken all the trees away, so we've got to plant trees. No, we actually need to plant grasses because that's the topography of that land, is to plant grasses because that's what happens in that environment. So holistic management, coming back to that, works with the environment, understand the environment. It takes a process of anywhere between 2 and up to 8 years to transition a farm from there. So this is a long-term commitment from that. One of the key elements of that is the livestock management that occurs. So what has been found is, going back to times prior to human farming, is that the animals such as cattle and sheep and other herbivores would roam in mobs. So they wouldn't be in static paddocks all the time, consuming the grass all the time. They would move in mobs. And during that process, they would do a lot of soil disturbance as well, which actually allows moisture to go back into the ground because it's not hard packed, it's churned up from there.
Makes sense.
And they actually quite heavily graze an area, and then they move on, and they will not come back to that area for months, maybe a season or two.
Just intuitively, they would rotate themselves.
They'll go where the grass is.
Yeah, okay.
So then the human system is like, I want to control where you are.
Yeah.
So I'm going to put some fences up from there. So depending on the farm, there's sort of two ways of managing it. If it's a very large farm, so we're talking thousands of acres from there, they actually get lower stocking density and continually move them, but they get better yield from each animal coming through there because there's more grass available from there.
Got it.
But there'll be periods of up to 6 months where there will be no livestock on that ground. So it'll look like an empty farm, but they're moving around.
They're rotating, yeah.
Smaller farms tend to do more fencing and having small fenced areas that they can move the cattle through. Again, trying to give the land that rest period that it needs.
Got it.
So they're the sort of two schools.
And in that vein, Chris, the whole, again, I think terms that are used very liberally, monoculture and polyculture with a beef cattle farm, the whole concept of polyculture farm management, is that something that even fits within the reality or the paradigms of an operation?
Absolutely. My own self, I've got a very small farm, and we went down the polyculture process. So we had a little, a reasonably large market garden. So the waste from the market garden was also used to supplement feed the cattle. The cattle were moved through the various paddocks that we had, and we had beef and lamb as well. So they worked quite well together. And then we had free roaming chickens as
Amazing.
well that would come in and clean up all the parasites and parasites from the livestock from there, so the worms and so forth that was in the dung.
Yeah.
Some of our farmers up in the Riverina area, they're potato farmers and also beef farmers as well, and they use that sort of poly system there for two reasons. One, it works quite well with the land management, that the cattle can come in post the harvesting of the potatoes and clean up the rest of the fodder that's there.
Okay.
And also it provides the farmers to revenue streams as well, which is always one of the challenging things when you're doing livestock production, is that depending whether you're doing beef or lamb, you tend to have, one or two paychecks per year, and you have to hope like hell that the prices are going to be good at that time.
Yeah.
So it's a bit of a boom bust system when it's done that way. So having another, bow to the...
Got it. And back to the sustainability thing, how do you literally measure it? Like, other than the practices, which I get, but how would you as a farmer measure that year on year your farm is more sustainable than it was last year? Is it the soil quality? Is it the number of species on the farm?
It's all of that.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's... really looking at the land, the carbon content in the soil is really, really important. So now we know that the higher the carbon content in the soil, the more moisture retention it has. So now the thinking is, instead of more tanks to hold the water, why not let the land hold the water? So increase the carbon content, you increase the moisture content in the soil, which is exactly where we want it. We want it in the soil for the grasses to grow. So again, other measures are biodiversity in the number of native animals that are in the system. You want a good natural grass species spread as well, such that you have grasses throughout the season, so some in winter and some in summer as well. There's a number of measures that can be done, and land to market, which is the commercial side of the Alan Savory Holistic Management, is doing some really good work in there, and they might be worthwhile getting in to have a chat as well. Yeah,
love to. So tying that all back to my original question, and sorry to take you down a different alleyway, that governance piece around your farmers and how you get comfortable, because all of your product is sold under the Provenir brand, and so ultimately it's your reputation and it's your product, etc. You go through this reasonably exhaustive original onboarding process. Does that incorporate actual looking at how they're managing their farm and getting hard data from their farms to substantiate what they're claiming in their application form?
We don't have a requirement for them to submit all of their data.
So there's an honour system?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And part of that honour system is the traceability that we provide with every cut of meat. So this comes into what we've incorporated is the traceability of what we're doing from there. So on every cut of retail meat is a QR code, which when the consumers use that on their phone, it will open up an app that actually tells what cut of meat they've got and cooking tips and so forth. So that's sort of handy for the consumers. Yep. But for those that really want to know, it actually profiles the farm that it comes from as well. So what is the breed of cattle they do, how they manage their land, how they have their breeding programs, all of that in there. Now, the greatest honesty system in our view is public scrutiny.
Yeah.
So these farmers are putting themselves out there for thousands of consumers to know exactly what they're doing. So if they're trying to, sneak in pesticides and herbicides and all of these other aspects that are detrimental to the meat quality and so forth, it's their name and reputation that's on the line. So we're not just a name that says Provenir. We link them back to the individual.
But how would a consumer ever know that farmers using herbicides or pesticides?
They'll never know.
They'll never know. But that's my point.
But any quality system doesn't prohibit people
whether it's organic certification.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you can be organic certified, and as soon as the auditor walks out, you can sneak out with your Roundup and do what you like. There's nothing that actually physically stops that. There's always an honesty point at some part in the line.
Does ultimately the whole concept of food trust platform, the likes of PwC and IBM are working on, do we get to that point where that will be impossible, that there will be literally end-to-end transparency because there will be these ongoing samplings of soil and grass and feed, etc.? Like I'm mildly aware of where we're going to it, but I'm yet to truly understand the practicalities of whether we ever get to that point where we can just relax, and then I think, and we'll get to this point in a minute, consumers will go, I'll pay handsomely for that because I now know there's no antibiotics, there's no growth hormones, there's no herbicides or pesticides, and, I truly am eating the cleanest of possible food, the most nutritional quality of food available.
Well, to touch on the hormone aspect is that all of them, according to the MVD or the National Vendor Declaration, has to make a call that the animals are HG free.
Yep.
So that's already in the system. That's part of the broader system with LPA.
With anyone making that claim, I'm assuming the vast majority of cattle in this country and globally are full of growth hormones. For context,
I haven't seen a lot of that in the industry.
Yeah, okay. Now, so you're saying that
all the farmers that I've been working with, I've never actually known any to actually use hormones. They tend to be more in the feedlot system, because they get better feed conversion from that.
But that's the vast majority of cattle raised in this country, yeah?
Correct. Yeah.
So.
But that's the feedlot. So
we have you aren't. I know that's my point. That for context for listeners is that the norm is, and the US stat that I have to hand is that 95% of cattle end up on a feedlot.
So there's some interesting stats from there that it's communicated that there's no more than, I think, 2.5% of cattle in feedlots at any one time. The bit that's not communicated is that 95%
of all cattle, that's right,
go through that
political manipulation of data. Which is my point. Back to Michael Pollan that you were saying before. It's not what we eat; it's what we eats that is so critically important, and that to the whole vegan and plant-based movement that people are so hysterical about at the moment. I think that naivety to what you actually are eating insofar as these monocultured, raised, bombed with herbicides and pesticides, quite often GMO produce that, sure, it's a plant, but it's probably not a very healthy or nutritional plant, and that disconnect between the binary view that this is good because it's plant-based and this is bad because there's an animal.
It's been proven, well, not proven, it's been shown numerous times that often our solution is worse than the problem that we had.
Plant-based is the classic case of that.
The impact of soy and how that's been...
Soy and wheat and even oil. Pea and sunflower oil and canola oil. And if you look at the ingredient, and I sow it, because we looked at this really heavily, Chris, because it was... it's pretty hard to ignore something like Beyond Meat that has gone up 500% since the 1st of May and is now a $6 billion company. It's hard to ignore that as a businessman. But as we scratched below the surface and got our hands on what the ingredient list was, it is the most gross misrepresentation of what's healthy for not only humans, but for the planet. And until people like you start putting forward the claim for what regenerative agriculture actually does for the environment versus what plant-based monoculture is destroying the planet, then this ongoing debate around what's good and what's bad is just really misguided.
Yeah, there's some on that point about the environmental impact of our food choices, which is, I think, agriculture is the second largest contributor to climate change after the
energy,
petrochemical industry. But unlike the energy industry, agriculture can actually be the solution. So carbon sequestration, so the pulling of carbon back into the soil, which is where it's come from in the first place, is the path and the easiest, most accessible solution to climate change.
How does that happen? What's the process of the carbon going back into the soil?
So it's about how we manage the land and the grasses, and which is what we were talking a bit before about the holistic management style of getting carbon-dense soil back in place. So we've been pulling the carbon out of the soil and also using petrochemicals and so forth, which is pulling out the oils and so forth and putting that into the atmosphere from there. So how do we get carbon out of the air? It's through photosynthesis, through plants and seaweed and grasses. So we can plant trees. They take a long time to grow. They pull a lot of carbon out, but nothing in comparison to grasses. So the best way, because they're constantly growing from that point of view,
is plant grass.
Yeah. So, and what does grass need to grow? Herbivores to eat it. So that's the cycle that is a positive pulling of carbon out of the atmosphere as well. So this is where I think the next thing that I get kind of excited and goosebumps about is actually starting to sell environmental meat. So not only was it done with an animal welfare perspective, not only was it also amazing eating quality, but when you do it, you know that you're supporting the farmers that's starting the movement to address some of the climate change issues that we have. So
do we talk about carbon neutral, or do we actually talk about carbon beneficial with some of the practices?
Yeah, well, do we say is it carbon positive or negative?
Positive, carbon positive.
Carbon positive.
Yeah. Is that possible?
There's been a study done in White Oaks in America where they've done a quite an in-depth longitudinal study of holistic management processes and the carbon levels in the soil. Very, very complex. It's not a sort of binary question is there more carbon in there or not? What are the factors that contribute to the carbon? And if there's less this year, was there environmental factors that just overrode there? And there's a lot of different factors from there. But what they were showing is that from a scientific point of view, you actually have to have all the null hypothesis and
all the compounding factors and different things.
So you got to have quite a rigid scientific approach to it.
Yeah.
But that was looking like that this was actually having a positive carbon impact on that farm itself. So we start rolling that across Australia, Brazil, America, all the first world countries that are basically stuffing the land, and get back to more natural farming processes. I think that is part of the solution. Yeah,
I get it. And one of the interesting things that I don't know enough to really strongly dispute, but it just when I look at it from a mathematical perspective, is this whole plant-based and cell-based movement that is beyond gathering speed. It's an avalanche at the moment. Is one of the debates they have is that animal-based agriculture is so inefficient. So you take a cow as an example, that it takes 25 calories in to get 1 calorie out, and so they get on their soapbox and talk about that. And intuitively for me, I say, well, it's probably accurate.
Feed conversion ratio of beef is about 0.15. So
there you go. So, but on the other end, how much plant material do you actually need to eat to get the nutrients and the calories you require to live optimally healthy versus a small portion of nutritionally dense beef or meat in general? And no one seems to talk about that. We talk about one side of the equation, and I'm an accountant by trade. Like, you got to balance the ledger. People need to start. I think if we're going to put forward, and I'm all for it, and I've said it publicly a number of times, that if plant-based and cell-based meat replace heavy industrialized farming, that's probably a good outcome. But if, going back to your point before, Chris, that if sustainable agriculture replaces factory farming, that's probably a whole better outcome altogether for a whole lot of reasons, not just people's health and the environment, but also employment. Anthony and I talk about this a whole lot, that the world doesn't need more accountants and lawyers and even doctors, to be honest. What we need is people going back to things that are net contributions to the ecosystem, and farming is one of those things.
As they say, how many times a day do you need to thank a farmer?
It's a good
Depends
point,
how many
man.
times you eat.
Yeah, no one wants to pay for that.
Exactly. And we need to get people on the land. We need to have, particularly in Australia, vibrant regional economies. And the governments see that, and that's why they're funding a lot in agriculture at the moment. So, agribusiness, ag tech, all of that's a really exciting space that we've been operating in for the last 2 years.
Got it.
And how we can do it better, and there has to be, and the government's starting to see that now, there has to be an environmental overlay on it as well. So there's no point having the greatest tech in the ag business sector if it's detrimental to the environment. So I'm quite positive about that. I can see that the trends are heading in that direction. And livestock production is going to be around for hundreds, thousands of years anyway. So, we have got a lot of interest and a lot of, as you say, hysteria about the plant-based and cell-based, and, it's going to replace the need for meat. The first question most people say, well, what the hell do you do with 28 million head of cattle? Do we retire them? Do we tell the farmers that they can't have a living anymore for doing that they now have to do plants? And then, how do we manage the plants that we harvest? The waste products of all the horticulture ends up going to the livestock. It's a circle. If you cut off one half of the circle, it doesn't work. And
I love the biggest one for me with the whole plant-based movement is that product is just going into QSR restaurants. And that's a solution, that the way to cure the world of its obesity epidemic and its health epidemic and the environmental impact challenges we have with climate change, etc., antibiotic resistance, is to get more people eating at McDonald's and White Castle and those kinds of places. It's perverse at every level.
Yeah, it's like I was saying before, often the solution is worse than the problem.
Let's talk about where Provenir came from, AgTech and the incubator, and who's funded it, how much money did you require, are your balls on the line?
Yes to all the above.
Because like we were saying, Anthony and I were saying, we feel the pressure all the time. This industry's hard. But Chris looked like a man under pressure when we saw him yesterday. So can we start, mate, at where the initial seed funding came from? Was it out of a fund, or was it just family and friends? So we've got 5 founders in the company. So each of those have their own stories that coalesce at a certain point. So I'll describe my story that got to that point, and then how we went from that point 2 years ago to now
where we are. So for myself, I'm like I said, I've got a science background. I did 20 years in corporate science, so working for a large biopharmaceutical company running their quality control laboratories, hence the scientific approach and training that I've had. Bought a farm 17 years ago, first generation farmer, #novice. I didn't even know the rules that I was breaking. So
Nice,
it was kind of funny.
Ignorance is bliss.
Exactly. And for me, it was always, I'd never saw myself as a livestock producer. I was a food producer. And to me, I always knew that what I was doing on the farm was producing food. So I didn't, I always wanted to move further to actually having control of the end product to me, which was a steak that you give to someone.
Got it.
And sell it. So when I started, there was probably 10 years juggling, a corporate job up in Melbourne and travelling 1,000 Ks a week back to the farm. And then my sister and I decided that it was time that we should try to vertically integrate and start selling our meat paddock to plate. So we started a small business. And
as opposed to selling it to abattoirs?
To sale yards, to abattoirs. So it's just selling it into the system, never knowing where it was going, putting them on the back of the truck and just
saying goodbye
and waiting for a check coming back. That just didn't satisfy me in any way, shape or form. So then we started doing that, going to farmers markets and selling that. And I think we sold, it was one cow, took us an entire month to sell that.
That makes sense.
So very small, going out to farmers markets. And the demand from family and friends was great. And
where'd you slaughter it though?
We had to take it, at that stage, we used a local livestock transport to take it up to Hardwicks. So that was in Kyneton. So that was about 200 kilometres one way. They're one of the few abattoirs that still do service kills for small-scale farmers. So that's important in the industry. So we've got to support that. And so anyway, we did that for a period of time, and then it would go off to a third-party butcher to cut it down and so forth. And I don't feel like I'm a control freak, but history has proven me wrong on that. That
you are a control freak.
I am a control freak.
Yeah, welcome to the club, man.
And so then I brought in the butchery into onto the farm, and I didn't realise at the time, but I was one of about 4 farmers that actually had a licensed, Prime Safe licensed butchery on farm, with all the paperwork and the headache that goes with that. But we were actually able to butcher and sell our own meat, which was really key. So we did that for probably 5 years, and that was going well. And even with the transportation, I hated getting someone else to do it as well, because they're under time pressure. So get the animals on as quickly as they can, and they'd be mixed in with other cattle and so forth. And then I was actually getting that meat back, and I was seeing the variation in the meat quality. So we went and bought a cattle truck, and I got myself a truck license, and so we started doing it ourselves.
Wow.
So then we could load them in our own time frame. When we took them up at the best time possible. During summer, we would go at 4 o'clock in the morning. That's so that they weren't having to have the heat stress and so forth.
You're playing the manure or something in the back?
It was even when we're driving, it's stressful enough for them. You can see the behaviour that they have in the back of the truck. So then one of my friends just said, look, there's a ag tech incubator entrance program going on. You should go for it. And I said, A, what's ag tech? B, what's an incubator? And he sort of rolled his eyes because he was all into that sort of stuff. And he said, ag tech is, that's the future of agriculture. And what you're doing is, you can play a role in that. And an incubator is going to take you in and, spit you out 6 months later as a business that actually has a business plan, bit of governance, learn how to do the pitch to investors and so forth, so that you can actually raise some money for your idea. So we went, okay, that's fine. So I applied for that and was one of the 100 successful candidates to go into that. So it was a 2-part program. First was 6 weeks, just online sort of tutorials, and you have a mentor to help develop your idea. And then at the end of that, the top 10 were accepted to go into
government. Was it government or private? Private.
It was private.
Yeah.
So it's Australia's first agtech focused incubator, which was SproutX. It's a national program, and it's into its 3rd year now. Big supporter. So anyone who's listening to this and has got a great idea in
SproutX, who's behind
it? It's a funding company called Findex that got, I think, some large superannuation future-proof money to come into that. That is actually funding it.
Awesome. Love it.
And then so they accept 10 per year to go into the program. It takes around about 6 months. It's very intense, but yeah, great program. So at the point of going into the program proper, my mentor at the time said, okay, you've got this idea of a mobile abattoir. We've done some preliminary numbers on it. It looks like it stacks up from there. From a consumer perspective, we think that this is solving 2 problems. So one, the farmer's issue about traceability of their livestock, where it goes from, and the costs associated with live transport.
Yeah.
And the bigger piece is probably the consumer demand of knowing where is my food coming from. The provenance of it. Yeah. So if you can crack that, you've actually got one solution to 2 problems, which is unlike most, you have one solution to one problem. Yeah. So anyway, they like that. So but he said it's way too big for you to do on your own. There is no way that you can do this. So that's when, through contacts, I met with Christopher, Jane, Phil, and his partner Deb. And I said, look, you've had these thoughts as well about a mobile abattoir. Do you want to jump in together and we can go into the program? So we kicked it around for a couple of months, and we decided that we could actually tolerate each other pretty well. And so in July we formed Provenir as a company.
July 18?
17.
Okay.
Yep. Went into the program, and again that really started to form us from a couple of people with a good idea, or what we thought was a good idea, into a company, an entrepreneurial company that was investment ready. We got E6 status, which is early stage investment company. So that provides really good tax breaks for our investors, which was a big tick. And then we went to market with a very extensive spreadsheet that showed the commercial profitability of it. Some market research that we had done, which showed overwhelming that there was consumer demand. Now, there's always a big difference to what consumers say and what their purchasing behaviour.
What did that research show? What was the size of the prize?
79% of people stated that they took into consideration the processing of the meat in their purchase from there. Now, whether that's
willingness to pay?
Exactly. So we did some testing around there. It was around 25% additional. People were prepared to pay an additional 25%.
So 79% of people interviewed said they took it into consideration. Correct. 25% said they're prepared to pay more.
No,
of that 79?
Of that 79,
yep.
The average preparedness to pay more was 25. So on average, people would say, if you could get the provenance and the quality, eating quality,
I'll pay 25%.
I'll pay 25 cents.
Damn.
More.
Damn, so, let's hold people to that.
That'd be fabulous. Now, as we said, there's always a big difference between aspirational market research and hard data of what the
it's the biggest problem with the world, Chris, is that people talk about wanting provenance, they talk about wanting pasture fed, they talk about a whole lot of things, but that willingness to pay is very rarely does it actually follow the language. What was your saying before? We don't judge people by what they eat. We judge people by we don't judge people by what they put in their mouth. We judge people by what comes out of their mouth.
Correct. Yeah.
And I think that reconciliation for everyone, like all of us, need to stop talking about things unless our actions map to to those philosophical conversations that we have around a dinner party.
And to that end, that's where the digital provenance comes into it, because there's one thing to say that this is provenance. The consumer has to validate it themselves. So that was really key for us, is if people are going to be true to their word, they have to have something that they know that they're getting what they think they're buying. So,
which at the moment is the QR code and the story.
And it goes back to it. So that's novel in the red meat industry. I know that seafood's doing some fabulous stuff in that space as well.
Yeah. And we're just getting started for sure. I think the whole food trust thing is going to, if there's ever been a better time to be doing what you're doing, it's right now, because the bullshitters are going to be exposed so heavily, so quickly, like over the course of the next, I reckon, 24 months, that people will either realize and know that what they're eating is filled with nasty shit, or otherwise, and it's a super exciting proposition. And you don't need that many people. Like 79% of people interviewed is a staggering number. I don't know how many were interviewed and what demographic.
The bit that really got us is when we did the survey, it was called a white label survey. So it didn't come out with any of our branding. It just said Red Meat Industry Survey. That's
so it could have been Betty from Blacktown, or it could have been Lucy from Point Piper.
So we pushed that out on our own socials.
That blows my mind.
And the company that we were working with said, we reckon with your socials, that was probably maybe 4,000 likes on Facebook and Instagram across our various socials that we had. They said, we reckon you'll get about maybe 200, 300 responses, because there's nothing in it for consumers or survey participants to do it. They do the survey, that's it. There's no reward. There's nothing out at the end. We got over 4,500 responses in 10 days.
Yeah, wow.
The share rate was staggering. And so our marketing company that we were working with went, holy crap, you guys are onto something here.
Yeah.
We haven't seen this before for an organic survey going out without reward.
Yeah.
It's like, that's what you're onto something here.
Which is super exciting.
Yeah. So
back to the investment side of it, the collective funds raised to get your initial truck?
Over the next 6 months, we raised just over $1 million.
Including your own cash in, or external $1 million?
External $1 million.
Yep, okay.
So the founders chipped in a small amount, probably 50K.
50 between all of you?
Yep. At the start.
Yep. And then another $1 million in external funds to give away how much of the business?
That was 25.
25. So you guys kept 75 and
gives a market value of about 4.2 or 4.3.
Yeah. Okay.
We also went to Meat and Livestock Australia, who was one of the supporters of the SproutX program. So that assisted us in having that connection in the first place, and got into one of their funding programs, which was a 50-50 contribution program, and that was just under 700,000. So that sort of validated us that the industry itself was wanting to see change coming forward and to diversify the product offerings in the market.
Yeah.
There's a lot of interest from export point of view. We have to start walking before we start running. Of course. And so that's what
Where in particular are the indications that export consumers have an appetite for Australia pure pasture-fed product that's slaughtered on farm?
Yeah, so Singapore, Hong Kong.
That makes sense.
Japan, definitely. It's probably a bit of a struggle because it's a tier 2.
Japan doesn't make as much sense, but certainly Singapore, absolute sense, and Hong Kong that has that vibrant hospitality and discerning.
UAE.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, interesting.
So
is it halal certified?
No. So
is that possible?
It is possible.
Yeah, it's so just another hoop you've got to jump through.
Have to go through that process. So again, if we were to go down that path, probably a partnership with another company that has expertise in that space would be something that would consider.
Yeah, good. Vix Meat. Good partner.
There we go.
So am I right? So $1 million you raised in capital, and then there was another 750 from MLA.
Yep.
So that's got you to where you are right now, which is alive. You've got a truck, you're processing.
So it's actually 3 trucks.
You've got 3 trucks, okay.
Yeah, so the truck itself, which we refer to as the MPU, or the mobile processing unit, that's the one that is basically the abattoir, and has been licensed as such. So that goes out onto farm.
And you only have one of those.
Yep. Plans to build more, but I'll jump to that in a sec.
Yeah.
So that goes out to the farm. It integrates with the yards of the farmers from there, and then it integrates also with the second truck, which has the refrigeration unit on the back of it. So the carcasses, once they're processed, go straight into a refrigerated space to start the temperature drop, because they have to be down to 7 degrees within 24 hours according to the Australian standards. And there's also a trailer behind that takes away all of what people refer to as the waste, but we see it as the non-edible resources, so the stomach contents and the heads and the hooves and render and hide and so forth. So,
and that is still used. Everything's used.
Yep.
Yeah. Love it. How much more capital do you need to scale it, or is it now just the uptake and the utilisation of the existing kit?
Yeah, so we're sort of doing 2 things at once right now. We're getting the unit up and running. We're increasing our production from there. So we're looking for partners to take the meat and distribute it through their networks as well, and provide the point of difference for them around the traceability, so that they can actually sell Provenir meat and everybody know exactly what it is.
Yeah.
And at the same time, we're going to start looking for a Series A, which is the next round of investment that we would wanting to go to market around November, December.
To raise money for what?
Subsequent units.
Units, yeah.
So we want to do another 5 units.
Yeah.
We've got the areas around Australia that we're pretty keen to deploy those units.
Where to?
From there. So southeast Queensland is an area that we want to go to. Victoria, definitely. So,
Victoria makes sense. Southeast Queensland, is there enough pasture-fed animals? Yeah.
Yeah, so out of the back of the Gold Coast area.
Okay. It's quite lush. Yeah.
Quite sustainable.
WA?
Cattle. Yeah, WA, so southwest of WA. The unit was built in Western Australia, and we've had fabulous support from the Western Australian government over there. They haven't been able to provide cash per se, but they've just been able to help things work and get us through the regulatory quagmire that we call our national road transport system.
Yeah.
For actually having the truck on the road itself. So that's one area. Tasmania is another area as well. So yeah, Tasmania, Victoria. We've got one in New South Wales, Queensland, WA, and there's a potential of another one in New South Wales as well.
And your business case, does it see the ultimate consumption, both retail and food service?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. So
do you have a sense on the split?
I think in the current scenario that we're doing, I think food service at the start is the way to get to consumers. And then if there's a retail option as well, so if they've tried it in the restaurants, the eating quality is fabulous, then that can support the retail purchase from there. So I see the 2 of them together, and it'll probably flux in between the 2.
Yeah.
But probably 60-40, I would suggest.
60 food service, 40 retail. Either way, that way.
Yep.
And from a price differential, Chris, if we're comparing, let's compare existing abattoir kill pure pasture product to yours, and compare that to grain-fed product, same quality, same cipher, etc. What's the percentage price difference, if any?
Are you talking at food service? Are you talking at retail?
Let's talk food service.
Food service?
Wholesale, yeah, so wholesale.
Wholesale,
yeah.
It's around about 15 to 20% premium.
Yeah.
Where it comes
to existing pasture-fed product.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. The the value add that we see is around the traceability. The eating quality has to stand on its own two legs. We can have the best idea in the world and the nicest feel-good factor, but if the product itself doesn't satisfy the inherent taste requirements of eating meat, then we're shot. I'm very pleased to say that it does, and that we've been really pleased. Well, you've tried it as well.
Yeah, no, we were all pleasantly surprised. Yeah, because it seemed like quite young meat too.
It was.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the one that we consumed was milk-tooth, so just on 18 to 20 months, so quite young. Hereford, which is more of a milder flavour than in comparison to Angus.
Yeah.
From there, so that's really not so much a profit margin in there. That's more a cost recovery. Our operational costs are a lot more expensive than a static abattoir. We can work to bring them down as we.
Does the scale, like the 5 units, what's the synergies that you get from that, or is it just more output?
The synergies from there really comes back as how the relationship of the mobile abattoir works with the processing, so the butchery side of things from there. So that's the part where the real scale comes into it. So if we can have a number of units operating in an area that uses one expanding butchery, then you get scale of economy of scale through that from there. The benefit of the mobile is that we can actually operate in the best areas for production and actually move over the season. So if one area becomes quite drought-stricken, for an example, you can travel 400 kilometres in the opposite direction, and you can find areas that actually have still got good grass.
Got it. There. And does the business case, is it built around that you're taking market share from other beef sources, or is it an incremental different consumer that's going to start eating more or different meat?
I think it's possibly a little bit of both. The marketing, particularly around the animal welfare and the eating quality, is the flexitarians that actually eat very little amount of meat.
But when they eat it, they want the best quality and they want to understand the story. And
so in that case, we're not really taking any market share from anyone because they were eating very little meat in the first place. So we
they
might become
eat and incrementally a little bit more. Yep, makes sense.
And we might be their brand that they seek out because they can validate it themselves and they know exactly where it comes from, and it aligns with their own welfare and moral system. And some of it will also be playing in the top end with other major brands in there as well.
Who do you see? Is it the O'Connors and the Cape Grims that you position yourself against?
They're the two that naturally come
to mind.
So
when you talk about a premium, you're not talking about a premium to those brands? Are you talking more generic pasture-fed brands?
Well, they've probably got greater capacity to decrease prices than what we have, but it's going to be in that ballpark.
So that kind of price point, which intuitively makes sense. Maybe your biggest marketing opportunity, and we can start a 12-step program around it for the recovering vegans.
I think at the moment there's a lot of talk about beef, cattle, the environment, fake meat, vegetarian, veganism, all of that. So it's a hot topic at the moment.
It is. And
we come up with a unique value proposition for consumers from there. So a lot of them, I eat meat, I really enjoy meat, but I want to be good about the environment, and should I be eating this other fake meat? My friends are doing that. Tastes okay, and then I find out more stuff in there. So I think it provides an alternative for people that I think there's going to be a real hunger for to go down there, and it becomes a talking piece as well, which always helps from a marketing perspective. Yeah,
it's an interesting one, and in our EDM that goes out this week, I did a piece on the per capita consumption of protein in Australia. And it's going up incrementally despite these so-called health-conscious consumers, which I think is, again, a naivety. But the big change is being that people are eating cheaper, nastier proteins, and this is a sweeping generalization, but like your chickens as an example, and less beef and lamb as, the premium and nutrient-dense products. So again, that reconciliation between people wanting to be healthier, more environmentally conscious, and more animal welfare conscious doesn't stack up. And the conversation around, come on, people, you've got to stop talking about this, or you've got to know a little bit more. And the other one, of course, is those of you that truly want quality, and probably ultimately the best investment you'll ever make, because the whole healthcare thing of eating shitty food now is, you're going to have to pay 10x, 100x, 1000x ultimately down the path, is just backing people like Provenir and Vicks and others that are so committed to giving you a product that's going to not only nourish you, but nourish this world that we live in, that's in, a pretty precarious position.
I totally agree. So I was just trying to think of what more I could say to her, but I think that you encapsulated that beautifully. And it's about people understanding the complexity of what we're talking about here. It's not a simple binary yes or no, I'm vegan, not vegan, or fake meat or real meat, and so forth. It's a spectrum on there. And then everyone's got to find where they're comfortable with what they're putting in their mouth.
Yeah. It's an interesting one, and I heard, and I've said this a couple of times on the show now, I heard Laird Hamilton, the big wave surfer, like very famous big wave surfer. He's 56 and still charging 80-foot waves, and he's a weapon of a human being. And he was asked by Joe Rogan, what's your advice to people about how to be healthy, whether you're 57 or 17? And he said, there's only one way to be healthy, and that's to eat naturally grown, preferably organic plants and animals. The more processed things are, the less likely they are to be healthy for you. And I think that ultimately we need to land back in that space where the solution doesn't come out of a lab, it doesn't come out of a manufacturing facility, it comes out of people going back to natural systems and a world that's in equilibrium.
And it's not cool to say, but meat and 3 veg is actually where we need to head back to. And there was a time when that's all that was available.
Yeah.
And, meat was at a price point that it had to be respected.
Yeah.
Now, we've actually, through our industrialisation of farming, been able to reduce the cost, not only keep it at the same price that it was back in the 1970s and 60s, but significantly reduce it through our production systems of increasing animal protein. Now, I'm not a big fan of industrial farming and the ways that we've actually done that. And again, coming back to the problem was that there wasn't enough protein in people's diets from there, so they wanted to increase it. The solution that we've ended up with, I think, is actually probably worse than the problem that we had in the first place.
100% it is.
We need to go back and start valuing meat for what it is.
Yeah.
Now, people get a bit squeamish about that, but meat comes from a live animal. Okay, so from my perspective, I choose to eat animals.
Yeah.
That's my choice.
But you've got to eat something living. I think this is the biggest bullshit argument that people have, that eating plants and eating animals, it's completely different. The animal is a sentient animal or sentient living thing, and a plant isn't. Although there's some literature starting to come out that says that the bioreaction of a crop, when you harvest it, it feels pain. And may not, it's a really interesting one that I heard recently. But that view, for something to live, something has to die. It's as simple as that, and we need to actually get back to accepting that, and just doing it in the most sustainable, ethical way.
Yep.
Yeah, amazing. Mate, we're going to come back in 6 months' time because I think this journey needs to be documented. We're excited to hopefully be a big part of it. But congratulations on getting to here.
Thank you.
I think you guys are without doubt an enormous part of the future and the solution to these problems, and it's going to be awesome to watch.
It's pretty exciting. Thanks for having me on.
My pleasure, man.
Cheers.